Joining us now, live in studio, is former head of counterterrorism operations for the NYPD and Fox News contributor Paul Morrow. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, the FBI says today, hey, we've done a good job. We've thwarted 2 of these attacks, but the enemy, they only have to be right once. We have to be right every time. Do you think D.C. is prepared with everything coming up for if someone does get through with bad intent and the means to do bad things?
Here's how I would make this very pointed. This is going to come down to leadership. Think about the disparate agencies that are almost certainly going to be involved here, right? You have DHS, you have FBI, you're going to have Metro DCPD, you're going to have the Capitol Police, you're going to have Federal Parks Police. You have all these different agencies coming together. You got to make sure everybody's in sync. And here's a subtlety. Are the civilians in? Okay, a big part of this kind of operation is the civilian analysts. And one of the great force multipliers. You hear about it all the time in the intelligence community. Our civilians keep us synchronized. They take all this disparate information. They're the ones who produce those threat products that we hear about, those bulletins that come out. Those come from civilians almost 95% of the time. Are they in? Because the last audit we heard, there was, what, 1% in if you take out the security guards and the gun carriers? So are they in? Is this being organized? Are all ships at sea being activated here to make sure that this upcoming series of events, which there's a number of them, we're coming into that season here, are all hands on deck, and is everybody pulling in the same direction?
Paul, we're 4 years now tomorrow, January 6, 2021. Tomorrow will be January 6, 2025. We still don't know why there were 26 confidential human sources on the ground there at the Capitol. Are we ever going to get any answers on that? Why do the FBI have so many people there, and why don't we know exactly why they were there?
You really got to drill down to the ground level to find out who these sources were, who was running them. Remember, sources are just not out there running around on their own. There's somebody assigned to, quote-unquote, handle that person, known as a handler, okay? Were the 23 who were not activated and purposely sent to the Capitol, were they told to go? Who paid for their care and feeding? If they didn't go, well, then were they being handled? And then there's even a larger question. Think about this now. You had over 24 sources, right? That argues that at least 26 different FBI agents were handling these sources for God knows for how long, at how much expense. How did they not pick up that this was going to happen? If that's how I ran my unit and I had that level of penetration in place and I got no indicia of the fact that something like what occurred was coming, I'd have been walking a foot post. I think that's a really salient question we have to ask ourselves. I don't like treating counterterrorism and this kind of prophylactic work as zero sum. Yeah. You can always miss something. Yeah. But that said, with this level of penetration, you got to say to yourself, guys, how'd you miss it?
Well, Paul, speaking of counterterrorism, we're learning more about the suspect in the New Orleans terror attack. The FBI is now releasing new video of Shamsud-Din Jabbar hours before he allegedly killed 14 people on New Year's Day. Authorities also revealing that the suspect made 2 recent visits to New Orleans to scope out the eventual crime scene. This new video shows him using Meta smart glasses to record a bike ride along Bourbon Street just months before the tragedy. And the FBI is looking even further back, now investigating his 2023 visits to Cairo and Canada.
We are looking to get some clarity on as to the purpose and reasoning behind each of those individual trips. Our agents are getting answers as to where he went, who he met with, and how those trips may or may not tie into his actions.
You know, Paul, from the information that we've gathered, whether it's accessing ISIS paraphernalia online, purchasing material for IED, and now this new information about his recent travel, what do you make of it?
So the travel is concerning, obviously. The first thought I had when I saw Egypt was that it's very close to Gaza, all right? And so, you know, is there any indication that he was in Gaza at any point or anything like that? There's no such indication. I'm just speculating. What concerns me more, actually, is Canada, and that's just because of proximity, right? What was he doing in Canada, and why was he there? Now, according to the brother's timeline, this would precede his quote-unquote joining ISIS, right? The brother said it was before last summer. So maybe at this point he wasn't fully radicalized. Maybe the trips were benign, okay? We really don't know. This is where I come down to the idea that I was saying earlier about it's tough to hold the counterterrorism operators to a zero-sum standard because, you know, if he took 2 trips that were relatively benign, if he was very cautious about how he bought what he bought, and if he used some encrypted apps, et cetera, because of our First Amendment system, it's very, very tough to pick these kinds of things up. You're not going to get them all. In this case, Where you really have to look is at the ground level security of the instance itself, of the event of New Year's Day.
Yeah.
That's not the Bureau, that's the local PD.
But it seems like the intelligence gaps. If he was accessing any of this online, which it seems like that's how a lot of people get radicalized.
No question.
How did they miss that?
So the best way to get that kind of stuff is on the other end, because you can't look at everybody in America's social media all the time. We don't have the resources. And again, there's a continuum in a First Amendment society, which is our strength, right? It's what really makes our system unique. It's also our greatest vulnerability. There's a continuum where you're allowed to do it, you're allowed to do it. Now you're into something else and we need to look at you. That gray spot right there, that sweet spot, for investigators is very tough to hit. It's very lawyered, and that really is the difficulty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're also following the explosion outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. An ex-girlfriend of the Green Beret who allegedly blew up the Cybertruck says he struggled with injuries and was depressed. And according to a U.S. Army spokesperson, the suspect frequently used the Army's mental health resources, adding, quote, he did not display any concerning behaviors at the time and was granted personal leave. All relevant records were provided to the FBI as the lead investigative agency. You know, this is so different, Paul, the only thing that was coincidental was the day that these two events occurred. This is a personal tragedy, isn't it?
Yeah, it does look that way. Those of us who were commenting on the two events subsequent to them were saying that, you know, they feel different. They don't feel linked. The motive doesn't seem to be a commonality between the two of them. This looked to me right off the bat as a message suicide, right? And one of the facts, and we have to deal with facts now, there's been a lot of supposition. One of the facts that's undeniable here is that there does seem to have been a triggering event, and that was a relationship, which is very often the case. So I would argue that we have a PTSD situation, something relative to his relationship going south. Apparently there was a big argument about infidelity, et cetera. And apparently he didn't really seem to want to hurt anybody or that many people. It wasn't like a terrorist event where he was trying to get a body count, because for a guy who has sophisticated training, it was a very unsophisticated device. And it really didn't do a lot of damage, thank God. So it seems to me like a very different kind of event. The first thing I thought of was the Major Nadal Hassan event in Fort Hood, where the Bureau, the local JTTF, and by the way, the Army investigators had indications of his radicalization. This was during the Obama years, and they stepped back from it for PC reasons. Can't afford that kind of thing anymore. So I don't know that that's what went on here, but I just hope going forward the Army is sensitized to the idea of people who are maybe struggling, and they leave where they are, they go home because he was on leave, right? Maybe you got to make sure somebody knows, somebody locally. Make sure you stay in touch with them. I don't know if the Bureau, if the Army has a program like that, but it looks like he was suffering, and then he was on his own.
We also have to improve the culture they come home to, improve the VA system, and stop allowing people to kneel when you have the national anthem, and stop having defund the police movements and everything else that comes along with it. They do this personal sacrifice, and then this is what they come home to.
And we will continue to think of his family. Paul Morrow, thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Appreciate it.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.